Welcome to A Year in the Bible with Daily Grace. My name is Kristen.
And my name is Katie. And we want to spend a few minutes a day with you walking through the New Testament, one chapter at a time. This year, we will fix our gaze upon Christ so that we may know him, not only with our minds, but with our hearts.
Together, we will learn that who Jesus is changes everything.
Hello, and welcome back to A Year in the Bible with Daily Grace. My name is Katie, a co-host on A Year in the Bible, and I have loved going through Acts with you. And friends, we have almost completed this book. I know for me, I have learned so much and have been so encouraged because Jesus in the Gospels, the compassionate, humble, and bold Lord, has been the same to his disciples in Acts. Acts is just a continuation of Jesus' ministry. The history of the mustard seed of the gospel growing and growing. Today, friends, we are studying Acts 26. But we need to backtrack a bit to set the scene. We ended chapter 25 a bit early on yesterday's episode, so we need to paint a picture of what's going on in chapter 26. King Agrippa and his little sister Bernice have arrived in Caesarea, and Festus, the governor, seeks their help. One of his prisoners, named Paul, had a case left undecided by the previous governor, so the power rests in Festus's hands for a formal charge. But this prisoner has appealed his case to Caesar, which means he will be sent to Rome. There's one problem, though. It doesn't appear that he's committed a real crime. Instead, Jewish charges against him seem like divides in religion, not in disobedience to Roman law. And so Festus invites King Agrippa, king of the Jews, to listen and help Festus write a letter with a formal charge to Rome. Chapter 25 records Agrippa and Bernice arriving at an auditorium with great pomp, clearly soaking in the opportunity to be needed by the Romans. In this auditorium, prominent men of the city and military commanders wait for Paul to be brought in. And this is where we start chapter 26. Remember, Paul is used to being his own lawyer, providing his own defense and tailoring his speech to his audience. And this time, Paul speaks directly to King Agrippa, who is well familiar with all things Jewish law, prophets, and Jerusalem affairs. I love this particular defense because with a crowd of important witnesses, Paul connects Jesus as the hope promised to the Jews throughout history. Paul proclaims Jesus as Messiah, the Messiah the Jews long for and yet rejected. Paul emphasizes the commonality between himself and the Jews who despise him. Once Paul, too, he had persecuted the way. He threw followers of Christ, just like himself, in prison because they proclaimed the resurrection of Jesus. He, too, was a strict Pharisee. He, too, now believes in the prophets and the law. But one thing has changed. Paul met Jesus on Damascus Road. And here, Paul does something really cool. He uses this experience on Damascus Road to describe Jesus' commission for him. Let me explain. Paul saw a light from heaven brighter than the sun, so bright that it knocked him to the ground. From the light, he heard a voice, the voice of Jesus, and it said, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? It is hard for you to kick against the goads." Kick against the goads? This isn't a saying we use in modern days, but it's likely familiar in the first century. It's an agricultural reference. A goad is a tool used by farmers to encourage a stubborn ox to move. Usually these were made of wood, with one end being pointed, and sometimes the stubbornness of the oxes would kick against the goad, and the pointed end would stab them. Jesus is encouraging Paul to listen to him, to stop fighting against the way. This is a movement he could not stop. Jesus calls Paul out of his stubbornness, out of the darkness he once walked in, and into the light. And this is exactly what Jesus commissions Paul to do for others, to open their eyes so that they may turn from their own darkness to light, so that they may be sanctified by faith in Jesus. I love that we get a bit more of Paul's commission here, and how every detail of Damascus painted a picture of what Paul's mission would be. He brought people from darkness to light all over the Roman Empire. Paul ends his speech where he began, that his message is nothing other than what the prophets and Moses predicted, that the Messiah who we now know is Jesus would suffer and rise from the dead. The light Paul saw on Damascus Road is the light of the Jews and the light of the world. I also want to make a special note about Paul's emphasis on the resurrection. The Jews' own scripture claims that the prophets working in the power of God had the ability to resurrect the dead. Think about Elijah raising the widow's son in 1 Kings 17, and Elisha and the Shunammite woman's son in 2 Kings 4. But no one could raise himself. Only God held that kind of power, and this is exactly who Paul claims Jesus to be. Exactly whom Jesus claims himself to be all throughout his ministry. This is what the Jews want so badly to deny. They deny that Jesus is God, and therefore, they deny the truth about his resurrection. I love the exchange that happens at the end. All this talk about light and resurrection and the prophets sounds crazy to the Roman governor, like Festus. But Paul is speaking directly to Agrippa. Paul knows that Agrippa knows and believes in the prophets, the ones who testified about the coming Messiah. And Agrippa says, "Are you one to persuade me to become a Christian so easily?" And Paul says that he wishes everyone could become like him. So undeniably sure that Jesus is the one God promised all along, that no conviction, no prison, no chains could take away his assurance. Of course, even King Agrippa can find no charge against him. He speaks words that remind us of a divine providence of God. Agrippa says, "This man could have been released if he had not appealed to Caesar." Wow. Paul is going to Rome because it's the will of the Father. He could have been released, but that's not where Jesus wanted him. Let's behold Jesus as Paul does in this chapter, as the light. The light shone everywhere Jesus went in his ministry. Before tax collectors, sinners, the lost, the lame, the rich, the poor, in Jewish and Gentile regions. Light conquered darkness everywhere Jesus went, until Jesus allowed darkness to swallow light temporarily. When Luke himself records in Luke 23:44 that darkness covered the whole land in the middle of the day upon Jesus' crucifixion. But the light shone again. Jesus rose in power and glory and authority over the grave. Jesus rose and appeared to 500 witnesses. Jesus rose and appeared to Paul. And because he rose, we can be confident today that any darkness we face will never snuff out the light. He has overcome. There's a song that you're likely familiar with from the 70s called "Because He Lives" by Bill and Gloria Gaither. And I think the lyrics are so relevant for us today, but also for how Paul's life changed on Damascus Road and how he feels now that he will journey to Rome in the coming chapters. Here are a few lines of the lyrics of this song. "Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. Because I know he holds the future, and life is worth the living just because he lives." Can't wait to see you for Acts 27. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of A Year in the Bible with Daily Grace. Don't forget to check out the show notes for helpful links and resources related to today's episode. And make sure you are following at Daily Grace Podcast on Instagram for more A Year in the Bible content, and at The Daily Grace Co. for all things Bible study resources. We can't wait to study again with you tomorrow. Bye, friends.